Hello, welcome to everyone who's joining us for this live Q&A session for applicants, potential applicants, and those interested in doctoral scholarships in the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Glasgow. It's good to have you all with us on YouTube, and I hope you can hear us, and we look forward to hearing your questions and having a good conversation. I'm going to do some bits of introductions and let you know how the session is going to run. So my name is Professor Bryony Randall. I am a Professor of Modernist Literature. I've been at the University of Glasgow for 16 years, quite some time, but I'm specifically here in my capacity as Dean of Graduate Studies for the College of Arts and Humanities. So what that means is that I'm the academic and administrative lead for all of our research postgraduate students across all of the arts and humanities disciplines. That's about 450 students doing research programs, PhDs and research masters. And I'm obviously in that capacity very deeply involved with the scholarship application process. I'm going to invite Tom and Katie, who are with me, to introduce themselves in a moment. And then after that, what I'm going to do is to just run through a very high level description of some information about the key scholarships that are available for applicants to arts and humanities PhDs in the college. But it's mainly a Q&A, so feel free to put questions in the chat at any point, and we're really keen to be able to help you with any questions you might have. But I'm going to hand over first of all to the people who really can tell you all about it from the chalk face, as it were, Katie and Tom. Katie, I'll hand over to you to make an introduction first of all.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie McClure. I am a postgraduate researcher here at the University of Glasgow. I'm based in the Department of History of Art, but I've also got supervision in chemistry. So my background, I did a bachelor's degree in chemistry here, which I finished in 2018 here at the University of Glasgow. And after that, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to go into the kind of main science fields that you think you might want to go into. So ended up doing an Erasmus Masters in Archaeological Materials Science, where I looked at applying chemistry to understand the arts and humanities objects that we have in our museum collections. And that led me to hear about a researcher again here at the University of Glasgow who's studying historical textile dyes. And through that, I ended up getting in touch with her, undertaking this project that I'm doing right now, which is looking at synthetic historical textile dyes in museum collections, how best to identify them and how best to protect them as well. So that's where I'm coming from.
Brilliant. So, I mean, such an interesting interdisciplinary project, Katie. And Katie, you're funded you have, well, an acronym that we're going to get used to hearing in the next 90 minutes. Your SAGs are funded, aren't you? You're funded by the Scottish Graduate School for the Arts and Humanities, is that right? Yeah. Brilliant. So we'll hear more about Katie's experience with that shortly. But first of all, we're going to ask Tom to introduce himself.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Tom Emanuel, and I am a postgraduate researcher in English literature here, specifically looking at fantasy literature and the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. My undergraduate was actually in political science, and my master's was a Master of Divinity. So I was trained as a theologian and a social scientist, a minister in the theologically progressive United Church of Christ. And now, of course, I'm in Scotland doing a PhD in English literature. All of this makes perfect sense to me, at least. I'm also SAGSA funded, and my project is looking at the reception of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings among non-religious fans and readers. I'm really curious about the way in which ostensibly secular narratives come to take on religious functions in people's lives in a post-Christian spiritual landscape. And I'm really delighted to spend some time with you and answer some questions today.
Fantastic, thanks. So another fascinatingly circuitous route over it. So one of the things I love about working with postgraduate research students is there's always a fantastic story behind it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just for about 5 or 10 minutes, just to talk through the big picture of the scholarship, the main scholarship scheme. And it is going to be, I warn you, acronym soup. My wonderful colleagues behind the scenes are going to be helping with putting up some captions that will help to explain this. So the main scholarship scheme that people applying for funding for a PhD at the University of Glasgow in the College of Arts is from an organisation called the Arts and Humanities Research Council, AHRC, and their money comes from the government, from the UK government, from part of the UK Research and Innovation. So this is UK government funding. It is the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which is a national organisation, distributes its money via organisations called Doctoral Training Partnerships, which you don't need to worry too much about that. You'll hear that mentioned, DTPs. But the one that Glasgow is a part of is the Scottish Graduate School for the Arts and Humanities. And it has the accolade of being the world's first ever national graduate school for the arts and humanities. Now, SAGSA, which is the way we pronounce that acronym, is a body which does lots of things. It provides training and cohort development and funding for certain student activities for every student in the arts and humanities doing a research postgraduate degree in the arts and humanities across all of Scotland. So that's one of the things it does. But the other thing it does, main thing it does, which is why we're here, is that they provide a number of scholarships across Scotland. These scholarships will provide fees and will also provide a stipend for people to live on. They are open to international students as well as UK-based students. So wherever you are in the world, whatever your national background, these are open to you. They are also, as this might be relevant to some people here, they are also available to people who have started their PhD. Now, the complicated bit is you have to have at least 50% of your research remaining by the time you take up the award. And if you're in that particular position, then you can maybe have a further conversation with us in the graduate school about whether you are eligible. But this, so just the headline here is, if you have already started studying at Glasgow and you are interested in applying for a scholarship, then these funds are already, in principle, available to you. But for most people, I imagine most people here haven't yet started their PhD. They may be thinking about starting possibly January 2024, more likely October 2024, and thinking about applying for scholarship funding to start at that point. A couple of things to note as well about the SAGSA funding. SAGSA is really keen as an organisation to diversify the student body that it supports. It's a key aim of what it does. So last year and again this year, at least 3 studentships will be ring-fenced for applicants from a UK Black and minority ethnic community. So that's one way that SAGSA is taking action to diversify the student body so that it more accurately reflects the global body that we want to support in arts and humanities research. And new for this year, applicants who identify themselves as falling within one of the widening participation criteria that SAGSA have identified, and there'll be lots of details about that if you follow the link through that's been put up on the screen. So, for example, people who have experienced, have been care experienced, who are our carers, people who are trans, people who have vulnerable immigration status, such as refugees or asylum seekers. The categories are all there on SAGSA, but people who fall in that category can identify themselves in that way and choose to have their project assessment calibrated accordingly. So again, I won't necessarily go into the details now because it's quite complicated, but basically that's a system that aims to diversify as much as possible the body of students who are supported through SAGSA. So that's the headline about SAGSA. I'm very happy to answer questions about that. Katie and Tom are the experts in being in receipt of that funding from the student point of view. I've been involved in the administration of these scholarships and supporting students to apply for them through a number of years. So do please ask questions about that. There are around 50 such scholarships available through all of Scotland. So it is important to say that the numbers are not high and competition is fierce. Having said that, Glasgow has historically done well in attracting those scholarships, so we feel confident that we're in a good position to support the very best projects to get funded. Other scholarships that would be available to you as someone who has an offer of a place on a PhD programme at the University of Glasgow In the College of Arts and Humanities, we offer a number of scholarships to, again, UK, EU and international students. Now, the number of these varies from year to year, depending on basically budgets. So I can't tell you now exactly how many there will be. There are a few. Again, the numbers, it's not double figures, it's a few. But the application for the college scholarships, you'll be glad to hear, is exactly the same as the SAGSA scholarship application form. So when you're applying for a SAGSA scholarship, you are also in the process de facto applying for a college scholarship. And again, there will be at least one, what we know is that there will be at least one scholarship awarded to a candidate who meets our widening participation criteria, because that's something we've wanted to address internally as well. So that's a college scholarship. Two other scholarship streams to mention. The University of Glasgow, a couple of years ago, in response to some work it did understanding racism and the legacy of slavery at the university, has taken a number of actions. And one of them is setting up a scheme that we've called the James McCune Smith PhD scholarships. And these are for Black British applicants to PhD programs. It's a university-wide scheme, but we have a number allocated to arts. And again, if you fall in that category, if you're a Black British applicant, then we encourage you strongly to apply for one of these scholarships. It is a 4-year funded position scheme. It includes a 6-month internship or work placement, and it includes having a mentor. So very important initiative from the university, and we're keen to get as many applicants as possible. And finally, some of you may be aware that the China Scholarship Council also offers PhD scholarships. So if you are a resident national of China, then you are eligible to apply through that scheme. I see we've already got quite a lot of questions, and I don't want to miss those, but I do want to say something about the timetable before we move on to those. The timetable is quite complicated and also quite early in the process. So we're already talking about applying and the scholarship round for people who are thinking of applying for a PhD next year. And the reason for that is all driven by the deadlines, the SAGSA deadlines. So we are currently holding an information session today on the 24th of October. There is a deadline for applicants to get their application for the PhD programme and the scholarship, which is the 4th of December. And it is really important that those are separate, because you have to apply for the PhD programme and there's a separate application for the scholarship. So those two have to be in by the 4th of December. So you need to be very prepared and know exactly what you're going to be studying in order to put it in a good scholarship application form. What then happens is that there are internal processes that sift through subject level. There's a college meeting in January. And if you are, I was going to say lucky enough, but if your proposal is strong enough to be chosen to be put forward to SAGSA, then you will get the chance to improve your proposal in consultation, of course, with your supervisors, and apply in a window that comes through in early February. So the final applications to SAGSA, this is again specifically talking about the SAGSA scheme, the final applications to SAGSA will happen in the first 2 weeks of February, and you will be told whether you're successful or not around April or May time. So that's an overview of the process and the timetable. I wonder if what we might do is have a look and see if there are any questions that have been starred for us to address. I'm going to have a look at my little list here to see what the questions are, if there's anything that I can answer, and ideally also if Tom and Katie might be able to help, but we'll get through some of these. So is the scholarship offer from the college the same as the SAGSA scholarship fees and stipend? Yes, it is. So thanks, Alex, for your question. That's an easy one to answer. Thank you very much. Harrison has asked an incredibly important question. Is it compulsory for you to get in touch with a potential supervisor before putting in an application? Absolutely, 100% crucial. And what I might do, in fact, is pause at this moment and ask, Katie said a little bit about this, so maybe you could pick that up, Katie, and then Tom, to say a bit about how they did that, how that process worked for them, and maybe reflect on why that's so important. So Katie, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so during my master's degree, when I was I had decided that I wanted to do a PhD, and I had kind of decided that I wanted to come back to the University of Glasgow, I was looking for supervisors that might be doing something similar to what I was interested in. And actually, when I heard about my supervisor's work looking at historical textile dyes, it helped me kind of tailor my master's thesis as well towards something that was going to be related to something that might be applicable at PhD level, that might be useful for the University of Glasgow. So I actually ended up getting
Now, I don't know if it's just me, but Katie seems to have frozen. She was having some tech issues earlier on. Oh no, we've lost Katie. That's what a live Q&A is for you. Okay, we'll pick back up with Katie shortly, but in that case, I'll hand over to Tom to say a little bit about the setting up the supervisor experience.
Sure. So I make no claims about the generalizability. Do we want to get back to Katie, or should I go ahead? Can't hear you. You are not unmuted.
Let's carry on with you, Tom, for now, and we'll go
Sure.
back to Katie.
Sounds good. All right. So as I was saying, I make no claims about the generalizability of my experience. The idea of between the conception of doing a PhD and actually getting into the sex process, I had about a month of lead time. I asked my Twitter feed if I wanted to do a PhD on J.R.R. Tolkien, where would I do it? And a number of people said, oh, you must go to the Center for Fantasy and Fantastic at the University of Glasgow. Talk to Dimitra Fimi, who is my supervisor here. She's one of the world's top Tolkien scholars. So I did that. I reached out. I pitched her on an idea. And over the course of about 6 weeks, we found a secondary supervisor. We workshopped countless drafts of my application, but it was really crucial to have her be like fully on board. I had no idea that SAGSR existed when I first reached out to her, and she, was very instrumental in catching me up on the process and getting me to come to one of these Q&As. And shepherding me along through the necessary channels so that we could actually, get a good application in. So I can just say that it was incredibly important to have a supervisor picked out in communication and in your corner.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. And I think, there will be some variety, obviously, but I think that experience is probably reasonably characteristic. If a supervisor is enthusiastic and keen to support you, they will be willing to put in some time and effort into helping you make your application as strong as it can possibly be. Obviously people have, various work commitments, and that time might be, might vary in how much time they have available. But if it's in a supervisor's interest for strong applications to get through. So yes, that is a kind of a characteristic experience. But again, just to reinforce that supervisor contact is absolutely crucial. Katie, sorry, we lost you. Did you want to pick back up around about that moment when we lost you?
Yeah, I'm not sure what point I got to, and hopefully you don't lose me again too quickly. But yeah, basically I ended up in contact with my supervisor a couple of years before, partly because I knew I wanted to do this PhD project, but partly just to kind of scout things out and see how the department was. So kind of similar to what Tom said, I heard through the grapevine that there was someone wonderful at the University of Glasgow working in the area that I was interested in, but also that helped me to taper exactly what area I would do my thesis in for my master's, because that helped me kind of, okay, I definitely want to work with this person, so it would be good if I had the experience to put forward to say that I can definitely do this project.
Brilliant. That's really helpful, and that's very interesting about, in a way, yes, you're still a long lead time for the process, but it does mean that you can start preparing early, even through the process of your master's. So brilliant. Thanks very much. Now I can see that, apologies if I'm going to mispronounce it, Ki has got some questions for our experienced scholarship appliers about the knowledge exchange public engagement impact. So they're asking, regarding the knowledge exchange public engagement and impact, thing in the SAGSA application form. How did you fill in that section? Did you mention something very general or very specific? So I might preface this by saying, if you've already gone and had a look at the SAGSA application form, you'll see that it's quite substantial, and you're asked to fill in a number of sections. Some you would expect, which are about your qualifications, and there's a section about your research proposal. That is the most important section, and it has the most points attached to it. It is by far away the most important. You're also asked to fill in a section about that included as part of that application is about the knowledge exchange and public engagement work. And the rationale for that is that we want to encourage our researchers to do work that is meaningful in a scholarly context, of course, but also in a broader context, and understanding how the work we do engages with all kinds of different cohorts, areas of activity beyond the academy. So there's a section there, and just to round off on the form, you're also asked to fill in and reflect on what training you think you might need as part of your PhD program and where that might come from. It's really crucial there that you have supervisors to help guide you, to have that discussion about broader research training, what kind of skills you might need to develop, and where the university or SAGSA or other bodies might be able to support you with that. But the question about knowledge exchange and public engagement, Tom, do you want to pick up on that first?
Sure. Part of it was the question about specificity, and I would say always more specific, more better. Even if you change what you end up doing, and that may happen in the course of a PhD, your focus of your research may change, or the specific kinds of knowledge exchange and public engagement activities you do may change. But to show the reviewers that you thought hard and are pointed about how you want your research to engage a wider public, whether that's scholarly or otherwise. And being able to, what helped in my case was thinking about it at the level of how do I want to talk to lay people? So how do I want to take this to a wider public? How do I want to talk to other early career researchers and PhD students? And how do I want to talk to the academy, right? Sort of being able to tier out, these are the various ways in which I want my work to speak into a variety of larger contexts. And the last thing I'll say about that then was that when they ask you for relevant experience that you have had that would play into your ability to carry out this research project, again, what was helpful for me was highlighting ways in which I already engaged in knowledge exchange and public impact in other roles that I'd held in past, to sort of proof of concept, as it were.
That's really interesting, because I think these phrases, knowledge exchange and public engagement, it's the kind of technical terms that we use in the academy and in other kind of similar contexts to talk about things that actually you might already be doing. Oh, you mean having a blog? Yeah, I do that. That's public engagement and knowledge exchange. So that's really interesting to hear that reflection. Thanks so much, Tom. Katie, what would you add?
So, yeah. The way that Tom went about it is kind of similar to the way that I went about it, but just like, I don't know how, maybe it doesn't feel that useful in the application process, but actually my knowledge exchange section has been really useful to me during my PhD. So like, it's worth really, really thinking it through and genuinely thinking about places that you might want to associate with. A lot of those places have changed for me, but the way that I've associated with certain institutions hasn't changed. So it's acted as a really good guide for me to like make sure that I am actually doing the knowledge exchange as I go through. So it's worth spending the time genuinely thinking about institutions, looking into local institutions that might have things that they can learn from you, or further afield. Local institutions were relevant for my work, but yeah, actually, it's helped to keep me on track.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and I think that's really good to hear, because sometimes people can see this part of the form as, oh, I've got to come up with something, but it should be things that genuinely would seem to develop organically from your work. And just before we move on to the next topic, I think what I would say about the specificity is, a really strong knowledge exchange application might look like a year-by-year program. It doesn't have to, but that is one quite helpful way of doing it. And it is likely to be specific in, as Katie said, or other people said, naming organisations that either you may have already said, look, if I get this PhD, I'd like to do this work with you. Are you interested? That's the kind of gold star version where there's already agreement in principle to collaborate, or at least that you've identified organisations you might work with or outlets that you would use. Another also successful mechanism can be along the lines that Tom really described, who are the audience I'm going to reach and how am I going to reach them. But that's again where conversations with your supervisors who will have plenty of experience of this kind of thing is crucial in kind of crafting that section. Okay, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to be able to answer quite swiftly. So another question about the number of nominated China Scholarship Council students, and asking about the number of China Scholarship Council funded places in the College of Arts and Humanities. It varies from year to year, but it's small. I think perhaps 3 last year, possibly. So again, the numbers are not high, I'm afraid, but they are they're still very much worth going for. The next question is from Jacqueline about disability. Does disability come under widening participation or is it separate? It does. And I've actually brought up in front of me the SAGSA guidance as to the categories that qualify you to identify as you could ask for recalibration under widening participation. So trans applicants, first generation at university, recipient of a means-tested scholarship or free school meals. Now that's particularly, of course, relevant in a UK context, but if you're from a different national context, you could ask SAGSA about what might qualify you under a similar kind of heading. Disability or chronic illness, care experienced or an applicant with care responsibilities, so a care experienced or a carer, and refugee status. So those are the widening participation categories. They're marginally different for the college version of widening participation, but marginally, and the categories there will be on the form. We'll show you what the forms are. So I hope that's helped with that one. There's a question from, again, and apologies for a mispronunciation, from Guanzhang Li, asking, he's saying, or she, I beg your pardon, if they're a new PhD student in another university and want to study in Glasgow next year, do I need to provide 2 references for the funding application? So if you're already a PhD student, you basically have to leave your, you'd have to leave your other PhD program and apply to join Glasgow. In a sense, whether you're a new PhD student in another university or not is I don't say, of course, it's relevant to you, but it's not relevant to the process here. So you would put in an application and put for both the application to study at Glasgow and the application for the scholarship, just as you would were you coming straight from a master's program or any other context. So that's that question. Okay, Ruby has got a question regarding the timetable. The college scholarship is 4th of December, but the SAGSA application deadline is February 2024. Right, so I will clarify this. The application for the scholarships, college or SAGSA, is the 4th of December because there's just the one form. The one form is the SAGSA application and the college application in one. So basically, 4th of December is eye on the prize. Don't really worry about anything else at the moment. When you're talking to your supervisors, that's what you're aiming for, 4th of December. If you miss that, you've missed SAGSA and college. If once the internal process of assessment, because we literally have about 200 people who want to apply for this funding. So there's sifting that happens at school, at subject level, and then at college level, and then about 60 applicants go forward from college to SAGSA. If you are in that fortunate 60, you then have a period of opportunity to improve and work on the application, really polish it, to go ahead to SAGSA in February. So hopefully that answers the question. But 4th of December, eye on the prize. I don't know whether do you remember that being relevant for yourselves, Tom or Katie, about that polishing process in February? Yeah.
Yeah, I significantly changed my project outline during that time, and I realised really that what I had proposed was 2 projects, and kind of took half of it out and focused it much more closely on one thing. But obviously, like as you say, like it kind of needs to be at the standard to get over the line and to get into that 60 in the first place as well. So it's not like all the polishing can happen during that time.
Yeah.
But yes, a significant amount of polishing, certainly.
Good, great. Yes, it's a little important little window. Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to not go through a few more questions to make sure that we've addressed them. So Paola's asking, I started my PhD at the University of Glasgow this January. Am I still eligible to apply for the scholarship? So you wouldn't be eligible for a college scholarship. You might be eligible for a SAGSA scholarship. And I'm just going to read out the language because then I'll keep myself right. Open to students who have at least 50% of their research remaining by October 2024, i.e. 1.75 years left for full-time students and 3.5 years left for part-time students. If you're part-time, Paola, you're definitely fine. If you're full-time, you might be slightly out, but I wouldn't, because maths is not my strong point, I wouldn't want to say for certain. So I think the calculations would be something you want to sit down with your current supervisors and check. Shu Yi Gao's got an interesting question. Can we contact 2 potential supervisors simultaneously? Yes, I would always do them the courtesy of saying, so I get, people approaching me, but I think it's reasonable for them to say, I'm approaching you because of your interest in X, Y, and Z. Always give a rationale. And I should say at this point as well, I work in modernist literature, so early 20th century. General modernist literature projects on someone I know nothing about is not going to sit. It's not going to be a good fit with me for a supervisor. You need to be really quite specific. Tom's talked about how, he basically honed in on one of the handful of people on the planet who can supervise this project. That's how specific you need to be. So when you're approaching a supervisor, explain you're approaching them because, so for example, in my case, I know you have an interest in women's short fiction of the early 20th century. Okay, yes, I can see this is a good fit. I've also approached your colleague, Dr. Whoever, and I'm in conversation with them, but I understand because 2 supervisors are always required. So that's another important thing to bear in mind. You will always have 2 supervisors, sometimes 3, but it's completely reasonable, but you should always be open about that, about the conversations you're having with people. Okay. I don't know whether either of you approached 2 supervisors or whether you knew where you needed to go. And Katie, obviously you had that pre-established relationship, but you had that process of finding second supervisors as well, presumably.
For me, in the process of finding a second supervisor was quite useful because I had already been here before, and I kind of knew that I wanted a supervisor in chemistry as well.
Yeah, so I guess there's a very specific cross-disciplinary need. But again, Tom, it sounds as if you identified a second supervisor in discussion with Dimitra, who will have been the expert in knowing who else might support your project, right?
Yes, she offered me a sort of slate of folks she knew who might be good potential secondary supervisors. And I did some research on my own and reached out to probably half a dozen people, and we found exactly the right person, Bob Davis, at the School of Education, sociologist. But I did have to ask a number of people, and they were like, well, your project is interesting, but I don't focus on Tolkien, or I don't have the qualitative research background, or this, that, and the other. So yeah,
that's really useful feedback, actually. I mean, it's to say, don't be disheartened if people say no. So please don't just scattergun email everyone in the subject area. That is not a good approach. But it's completely, I often get students who've approached me and I can understand why, and either I don't have the capacity that year, or it's not I happen to know that actually there's someone else who might be a bit better. So don't feel disheartened if the first couple of people it's not a perfect fit, as long as you aren't scattergun approaching everyone in an area. That is not going to go down well. Okay.
Of course. I can just add as well. Actually, what helped my project and getting my second supervisor. My two supervisors had worked together before, previously supervising a student, and that's made it really easy to establish that like supervisory team relationship with both of them because they have had a previous student. So that's worth thinking about in terms of second supervisors as well, I think.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. That pre-established relationship is, and it's nice as well because then you're sort of part of an existing, which you would be, you're part of an existing research community, people who work together, who like working together, who have shared interests and all of that. That's a really important point. Okay, I'm going to go through some questions from Neka here. Yes, you can apply from the UK. Now, you're asking if you must hold a master's in theatre art for her to be able to apply. Obviously, I'm assuming that theatre studies is your area of interest. The vast majority of our students have master's qualifications or are studying for them and expect to have them by the time they start, the vast majority. However, there are exceptions. So, for example, and primarily, if you have significant professional experience, and I mean high-level professional experience, and I'm talking people who have been award-winning theatre directors for 10 years, for example, you don't have to have done, but if you've got significant professional experience, then which includes, what we need to know is that you have the skills that will enable you to do this big bit of research, this 3 years of independent original research. So that's where a master's shows that you can do independent research to a certain level with a dissertation element of the master's. If you've done a job which actually also, you've been a curator and you've published on items in the collection you look after, that kind of thing might also indicate that you've got the capacity to take on this big research project. But most people will need a master's. Now, the question of what the master's has to be in is interesting, and I might maybe ask Tom to say a bit about this. Well, but I mean, both Katie and Tom have interesting kind of roots in, but Tom, you talked about the fact that your master's isn't in the same discipline as your PhD, and I wonder how that conversation went when you were approaching the PhD program.
Sure. So, as mentioned, my master's is in theology and ministry, and that's what I'd been doing for 5 years before I ever looked in on doing a PhD project. And so, certainly in applying, I mean, I'm still using theology as a discipline in my project, looking at non-religious reception of a story by a Roman Catholic, but in the application process, feedback I got from several reviewers was to show the way in which my background in ministry and theology connected to literary studies. So things like biblical hermeneutics, exegesis, what kind of coursework I had taken as a master's student that would set me up to do high-level literary criticism, which was extremely helpful feedback. And that was largely from people in the School of Critical Studies who commented on my various application drafts.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. I don't know if there's anything else to say, Katie, from your perspective of the route that you've taken.
So I kind of used my master's degree.
Yeah.
If there's anyone who's a bit of an earlier stage, I can use my master's degree to help me make that transition. But something that was really important to me was in my writing my draft, like selling it as an arts project, because it's kind of interdisciplinary as well. So I had to think about that in that context. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. So yeah, as I say, so the research, a master's qualification is a very solid preparation for a PhD, and that's why most people have it. But in many of the cases of the questions that you're asking, my key advice is going to be take advice from a prospective supervisor, because they will know exactly the disciplinary expectations in particular areas and what may or may not be adequate as an alternative to a master's. Okay, I'll have a look at some more of the questions coming through. So question here, did you say we should apply for a PhD program before applying for the scholarship? I mean, basically at the same time, you could, if you were going to do one before the other, I would certainly apply for the PhD program first. And the application for the PhD, I think it's probably fair to say, is less onerous than the scholarship application. The PhD application is your certification of your qualifications and a kind of an outline information form and a statement of your research proposal, whereas the form asks some more complicated questions in forms you might not be familiar with. Was that your experience? Again, Tom, Katie, if either of you want to jump in to talk about whether you remember if you did it in a certain order or whether they kind of went together.
In my case, at least, the application for the PhD was basically a boiled down version of the SAGSR application. I mean, it goes into so much higher levels of detail, and compared to what the college asked for, it really was relative. I'm not going to say it's minor because it's still a PhD application, but it didn't feel like a whole lot when I'd spent months and weeks hammering out every single word to make sure that I got into exactly the 2,000 words that SAGSA lets you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if that was similar for you, Katie.
Yeah, much the same for me. I think, I remember working a lot on my SAGSA application and less working on my college application. So I think the amount of time that I spent going over and over and over the SAGSA application probably was a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be accepted on the PhD programme for the scholarship to be relevant. So obviously it's important that that's good. But having said that, if you have a supervisor, preferably two, who've already said, yeah, I'm behind this project, and they've seen your research proposal and they're behind it, what then happens is when you apply, it goes through the institution and it comes down through colleagues within the subject area and will land on your supervisor's desk, because the person responsible for processing the applications will see that Professor Randall's been mentioned. It'll come on my desk and I'll say, yeah, no problem, I've seen this, great project, happy to support it. So from that point of view, the key thing again is having supervisors behind you, and if you have supervisors behind you who have said yes in principle, then your application, as long as there aren't other, and there's some questions here that I'll come to that might apply, that as long as there aren't other formalities you have to comply with that get in the way, that should be straightforward. Okay, Harrison has sent his PhD music proposal to a few professors with no reply yet. What should I do? Time is of the essence. I hear you, it's difficult. It is a busy time of year. I think what I would suggest you do, that we have PGR conveners, so members of staff who are responsible for looking after and coordinating PhD students at subject and school level. So I would suggest that you get in touch with the PGR subject convener for music. It won't be easy to find out who that is, so I think probably the best thing is to contact us in the graduate school. So if one of my colleagues could kindly put up a contact for the graduate school, an email for the graduate school. I've supported by 3 fantastic colleagues in the graduate school, professional services colleagues who'll be able to help, and they will put in the direction of either the school or the subject PGR convener who will be able to assist you. A question here who says, if I'm not a native speaker and I've got a master's degree, do I need IELTS? Yes, I believe that's the case. I am not on the expert end of international applications. And again, there may be people behind the scenes who can find the requirements there, but there is usually an IELTS requirement for non-native speakers. Michelle asks, in February if you are being considered as a serious award candidate? Yep, you are. In fact, you probably know in late January by the time we've done the college sifting. So that's the time when it's all systems go and you're doing the polishing if you are going to be put forward for the SAGSA funding. Knock over a few more. It doesn't sound very good, does it? And then we'll have another wider conversation. So Carrie's asked a great question. I'm so glad you've asked this question, Carrie, because it's something that I really should have mentioned earlier. So Carrie's asked, are second supervisors just from Glasgow University or Scottish universities? Is it possible to mix with Northern Ireland or England Wave second supervisor? So I'm going to just take a step back and provide a bit of context for that, because Carrie obviously is in the know, and just in case people aren't. Most students at the University of Glasgow, most PhD students across the board, have 2, sometimes 3 supervisors based at the University of Glasgow. However, SAGSA, because it is a national graduate school for the arts and humanities, is keen and able to support cross-institutional supervision. That is, with 1 supervisor at Glasgow, and if you're applying primarily to Glasgow, your principal supervisor will be Glasgow, and another supervisor at another, and it would be another Scottish university. And in fact, it would be one of the Scottish universities who are a member of the SAGSA DTP. So not every Scottish university. And the idea there is that SAGSA conceives of itself rightly as an entity, as a collective. And what they want to ensure is that, yes, you're studying with Professor Randall at Glasgow, but actually the other person who's got amazing expertise in this particular area is Professor Smith at Edinburgh or at Dundee or wherever else. And so that's a conversation, again, you'll have with your supervisor. Say, I think you're the best person to lead this project. Who else is there across the whole consortium of SAGSA who are in the best place to support your project? So to answer your question about the rest of the UK, SAGSA has a mechanism for cross-institutional supervision across those Scottish universities. Any other institution, so that's a Scottish institution that's not part of SAGSA, of the SAGSA DTP, or across the rest of the UK, that can't formally be part of your SAGSA application. That wouldn't be a formal application for cross-supervision. I slightly hesitate to mention it because it's complicated. There are exceptional instances in which somebody can have an external supervisor from another institution. It is unusual and it is complicated, and there are fees and funding issues that make it not the go-to option. But it is possible, if your supervisors feel very strongly and can make the case to their heads of school, to have an external supervisor. But I would treat that with enormous caution, and that really, as things stand, the cross-institutional supervision is supported if you have a SAGSA scholarship within the SAGSA member institutions. Okay, a couple more questions and then we'll have a bit more of an open discussion. Michelle says you'd love to hear about other successful SAGSA applications. Absolutely. And what's great is that if you have a little look around the SAGSA website, you'll find profiles of people who are funded by them. Some fascinating projects, and there's a blog, a SAGSA blog, and other ways of finding out about the kind of projects they fund. So do investigate. And Anne finally says, are all the subject areas under the Humanities School eligible for SAGSA? For example, war studies? Absolutely. Anything that we cover at the College of Arts and Humanities is in principle available. Again, the key thing with our repeated refrain is about contacting a supervisor who is the right person to supervise your project. Thanks so much for great questions. We've got a little pause in the question stream now, and I wondered if, I don't know whether either Tom or Katie wanted to jump in with any either top tips or things that were particularly challenging when they were applying for the scholarship. It's a broad question.
I guess the main issues with my first draft of my application were really that I hadn't really been looking at exactly what SAGSA was looking for. So I think that there's resources on the SAGSA website that are really, you can taper your application around, and that was what made all the difference to my application. I'm sure the application wouldn't have been accepted in its first form. So I think looking specifically about what SAGSA means when it says training needs and what it means when it says knowledge exchange is what made all the difference to my application in the end.
Yeah, it's the usual advice, read the rubric. And there is a lot, I mean, it is quite a lot. It's a lot to process. It's a time commitment, but that's really interesting and really helpful observation, Katie. Tom, anything you'd add on that?
So I would say be prepared to take up a part-time job, basically, in filling this application out and getting through all the rounds of it, because it's going to take a huge amount of time. I was lucky in a place that I was able to take the time and dump into it over the course of 6 weeks. If you have more time to lead up on that, I think that's always better. And it's going to be a really iterative process, or at least it was for me. I cannot count the number of drafts I went through with my supervisory team before it ever went in front of other readers and reviewers, and each round of readers and reviewers came back with something that they wanted changed or wanted updated or wanted expanded upon. And that went up, I mean, right through the beginning of the official submission window in February. And then it's a waiting game. I mean, even in my case, I was waitlisted actually for the first round. I did not receive a funding offer on the first round and was put on the wait list. And what happens is that sometimes people who have already accepted offers from other institutions or have found other funding streams, by the time that SAGSA actually gets around to offering the doctoral partnerships. So I did get in on the second round and was very grateful for that, certainly. But there was a lot of it was just a very iterative process, I guess I would say, again, and like sticking with it, like it's worth sticking with it, because your project will only get more and more refined. And I got to tell you, it certainly has made my last year and a half a lot easier, knowing not exactly what I was going to do, but having a plan laid out where it's been like fairly smooth sailing. That's not going to be the same for everyone, but in my case, it really has helped ground what I needed to accomplish in my first year, and now what I'm looking forward to accomplishing in my second year. Actually having gone through that process means that I've got a pretty good roadmap.
That's a really interesting point, and it is a really important one, because these scholarships, obviously they're well worth going for, and we do well in Glasgow getting them, but with the best will in the world, most people who apply aren't going to get them. That's the numbers. But the process of going through that process of going through this quite rigorous application process, where you're required to think hard about it, to plan it, to work well with your supervisors, that's none of that time is wasted, really. That's all beneficial in terms of how your research will progress. So that's a really interesting thing to hear. I wonder if something else I might ask you both to talk about is a bit of your experience of what it's been like being in the SAGSA cohort. What, if there's been training, events you've attended, what that's been like, because of course they give you the money. Yes, please, absolutely, bottom line. But the other things that one gets if you are a SAGSA funded student. I don't know, Katie, do you want to pick up on that one first?
Yeah, I think that's been actually something that I really underestimated when I applied for SAGSA, how much it would impact me. Being part of SAGSA, there's optional and compulsory events that you have to take part in, but it really has forced me to be part of this wider cohort. And I think having a background in chemistry, which is quite group focused and lots of people working on similar projects that are kind of contributing to similar goals, suddenly I was on my own and I was working really, it was kind of isolating. But because I was part of SAGSA and funded and non-funded students are part of SAGSA, it meant that I've been connected with like a big range of people. I've had opportunities to organise events and get experience in a bunch of different things, training opportunities, and lots of different things that I didn't expect. And actually, I had no idea how important that would be for me before I started. I didn't understand that until I was in it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it is, it's, people here will know, if you're already working the arts and humanities, that particularly when you get to PhD level, research can be quite solitary. It can often be yourself and your book and your screen, but it can be that way. So, and it's increasingly moving away from that, and we want to be able to foster opportunities for people to work together. But that must be quite different from a sciences background, where people are used to teamwork, lab work, being in a certain place together at a certain time. So it's really great to hear that sort of the SAGSA cohort has kind of provided that for you as well. Tom, any reflections from you?
Yeah, I really value getting to build a cohort with folks who are working on widely divergent things from me. I have year mates who are working on topics as different as women's resistance to land enclosure in the Highlands in the 19th century, dialect and accent prejudice based on working class accents like Glaswegian or Mancunian, and feminism and secularism in Libya. These are all things that has on the surface very little to do with J.R.R. Tolkien and post-Christian spirituality. But the fact that I have these people whom I meet on a fairly regular basis, I think is it's intellectually stimulating, and it's valuable in being able to build collegial relationships and collegial networks that will support my continuing research and scholarship, and putting me in a position to support others in their continuing research and scholarship. I also think it's worth noting that SAGSA doesn't just give you money for the stipend and your tuition and fees. There's also a lot of other opportunities, training opportunities, and engagement funding and cohort development funding. If you've had a look at the PDF, you'll maybe be familiar with some of these terms, and they're actually keen to see you having suggestions for them in your application, ways you might use some of the funds that they have to travel to an archive or to develop a training program with a couple of your colleagues to offer to the wider HEI network. But SAGSA isn't just a studentship and a bit of money to make rent with. It's also a whole network of people, a whole network of colleagues, and a whole network of resources that I didn't realize even when I applied for it, which I've been very grateful to come in contact with.
That's really great to hear. So it's, that diversity of projects is just fantastic, isn't it? And I think there's always a risk, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it as researchers, that you kind of can start focusing quite narrowly in on what's relevant to my subject area. Well, we don't necessarily know what's relevant in advance, and those kind of fortuitous connections and can be so valuable, as well, of course, as the sort of social and the well-being side of it. And thanks also for mentioning, of really emphasising the additional benefits and opportunities and funding streams that SAGSA offers. I should also mention that any student, again, anyone taking a PhD at Glasgow or indeed in any Scottish university, can take the opportunity for some SAGSA schemes that are available to anyone, whether you're funded or not, including an internship scheme, which is just fantastic. So funded 6 months of a funded internship project with a project that's relevant to your PhD, that will be part of your development, skills development, all of these professional skills development. I see those because I sign them off internally, and they're just wonderful opportunities, and that's something that any student, whether you're a recipient of a scholarship from SAGSA or not, can apply for. So other things to bear in mind. I'm going to just nip back to the questions, and I have a question that's asking whether it's necessary to attach a complete research proposal in the first email when reaching out to potential supervisors. Yeah, I think yes. I mean, I would say, and a research proposal, in terms of expectations, we would expect to see something that's probably a 2 or 3 A4 sheets long at the most. I have seen research proposals that are dozens of pages long. That's too long. People don't, that's too long for people to engage with. But absolutely, your supervisor needs to understand enough about your research proposal to really be able to see if they are the right person to support it, and if not, then someone else. So yes, you email them and you say, I've taken the liberty. You might say, are you taking on, because it might be that people don't have capacity, they're completely full for supervision for the next year. But I've taken the liberty of attaching my research proposal, and usually a CV as well. Let me know if that will be of interest. So yes, please do. I'm going to skip to the bottom, the last question, because then I'm going to skip back up again to questions that I think that Katie and Tom should answer. So I've just finished the master's programme. Should I offer the grades of IELTS, or will I be exempted? Again, so this is a question about IELTS requirements, and I don't deal with the international application front side. So I am going to suggest that you contact the grad school, might be able to help. There's an email address there, or look at the requirements for our international students. But sorry that I'm not able to answer that straight away. My understanding is that for all non-native speakers, there is an IELTS requirement, but I wouldn't want to be the final arbiter of that and say the chapter and verse on it. So do contact us to get more information. Michelle asks, if you had to apply again for the grant or scholarship, what would you change about your applicant? What would you have done differently? It obviously worked because you got it, but that's an interesting question. Anybody got any thoughts on what you...
I feel like my application in the end I'm quite happy with, and actually it's been quite useful because my supervisors have told me when I've started to get a little bit too broad, go back to your application and check what you were supposed to be doing. So I'm pretty happy with how my application turned out in the end, but This is potentially not a helpful thing to say at this point in the year, but I would have started earlier. I had been thinking about it for a long time, but actually sitting down and looking at what SAGSA want, I didn't do it until kind of quite late. Like, I had been doing a proposal, I'd been doing my college application, I did that a few months before, but I didn't actually get into the scholarship application thing until I think too late, and I felt so. I'm happy with how my application turned out, but I would take more time to consider it in advance. I think.
Thanks, Katie. We've got a little bit of a glitch on the connection to Katie, but that's very good advice. And it's kind of, as Tom said, be prepared to be spending quite a lot of time on this if you want to commit to. Oh, we've dropped Katie for a minute, but I think we heard her headlines. Tom, anything you'd have done differently?
I mean, that's honestly more or less what I would have done differently. I slammed that application process, and I'm obviously pleased with the result of that. But for my own sanity and for the sanity of my family, at the time particularly, I have two children under the age of 3. So for their sake, I wished I'd gotten going about a month earlier.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, we are where we are, but the good news is that there's 6 weeks from now to the application deadline, so there is time. Great, thank you. Anne asks, speaking of rent, a very good practical question. How do you feel the stipend helps realistically with the cost of living in Glasgow? Tom, do you want to pick that, and then Katie?
Sure. I'm in a bit of a special case. As I mentioned, I have 2 children under the age of 3 and my partner who live with me. So we have more substantial housing needs than if you're a single person, living in a studio or in a flat with flatmates. It certainly doesn't cover this. It doesn't cover our room and board. So I'm not a great person to ask about that. It's also the odd thing of I was coming from a much more expensive housing market. I was living in Southern California before I arrived in Glasgow, and so I experienced it, ironically enough, as a significant discount on the amount I'd been paying previously. But that is a case in which I think my experience is non-generalizable.
Thanks, Tom, for your honesty. Yes, fair enough. I mean, every situation is different, isn't it? Katie.
I'm chopping in and out a bit here, sorry. But I'm kind of in an opposite situation where I'm in quite a good position, living with 2 other adults who are my partner and my brother who are earning. So we're in a good situation. But yeah, I think that, again, I'm maybe not in a kind of a situation where I can say that it would work for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right. You know, the stipend is what it is. It's not an awful lot. It's not an awful lot of money. Glasgow isn't. I mean, it's not the cheapest place to live in the UK, but it's far from being the most expensive. So I guess it's really a question of calibrating what your own, what you know that your own particular kind of, personal needs and maybe family context needs will be. But there's quite a fair bit of help with things like finding accommodation from our Student Representative Council, for example. I mean, Glasgow itself, the university has a certain amount of accommodation it can assist with, postgraduate accommodation, but there's a lot of postgraduate accommodation, private postgraduate accommodation in the city. And then in terms of finding things like a flat share or something that might be more congenial, the Student Representative Council can help with that. Here's a good question from Regan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She found out about SAGSA last week, started the Masters in September. Should she just take a year out after Masters to prepare this application? It sounds like a big beastie. You are not wrong. And I can offer some thoughts on that, but Tom, what do you think? What would you say? Pros and cons.
I guess I've not been in that exact position, so I don't know that. Again, my experience is not everybody's experience. I think that if you've got a really strong sense of what, like, if you have a really strong sense of what you want to do, like I did come into it with like really wanting to do a particular thing, and the shape of that thing and the way that I expressed it became honed over the process. But if you like know what you want to do your PhD on, what your master's is leading into, then I don't see any reason not to give it a shot. Because again, like I said, even if you don't get it, then you've got a really strong PhD proposal for when you want to start your doctoral studies next year or the year after that, depending on your life circumstances. So I'm not sure what those look like for you, but as long as you've got a really strong idea of where you want to go, then I don't see any reason not to give it a go.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, and I should also say that there isn't a limit to the number of times you can apply to SAGSA. So say you're doing your master's now, you feel like you've got the time and energy to give it a go, and crucially that your supervisors are going to support you, because so what I was going to say was that if you do it and you don't get it, you can apply next year, whether you've started a PhD program or whether you decide to defer the start of your PhD. The issue is, again, the mantra is the relationship with supervisors, because if your supervisors don't really think, supervisors might say, you know what, I think you're going to have a stronger case once you've finished your master's, and that might be difficult to hear because people want to get on and do it. Sorry, that's my son calling me, which I'm going to just let him speak to his father instead. You might want to get on and do it, but if you are keen to put yourself in the best chance for a scholarship, then it might be that waiting until you've got the master's under your belt is worthwhile. But Katie, of course, you've described how in your situation, the master's was kind of part of the process in a way that it led seamlessly into it.
Yeah. Also, I mean, so the way things worked out for me, in my master's, it was in Italy, so my final exam was an oral exam, and it happened to be the day after the SAGSA application deadline in December. So it worked out for me in a very, very, very busy period. I almost didn't submit a SAGSA application. After one of the rounds of feedback from my supervisor, I thought it was insurmountable. But I decided in the end just to submit when I was finished, something that I felt that I was happy with the view to, like Tom said, being in a really good position next year if I hadn't got it. But yes, it's weighing up life and whether that's possible for you while doing everything else.
Yeah, there's no one answer to that question, but these are the kind of factors to consider. And exactly, it does depend very much on where you are with the idea of the research proposal. So here's a not good way to do a PhD is go, I think I'd like to do a PhD. Maybe see if I can come up with an idea. That is not the basis for a success. A good grounds for success is while you are, I mean, maybe even like end of your undergraduate or master's, or while you're doing some, while you've got other, in your professional life, you go, wow, this seems really interesting and there seems to be more to say about it. I would love to spend 3 years thinking about this. And it seems to me like this is a very particular area that is a good basis for a PhD. Just as a kind of general overview. Okay, a couple of questions here. How many words is the word limit of a proposal? We don't set a word limit, but as I said before, I would, when you're sharing a proposal with a prospective supervisor, you will test their patience if it goes much beyond 3 sides of A4. I'm terrible at knowing exactly how many words go on a piece of A4. I've always found it confusing, though. That kind of match. But anyway, so I don't know, maybe Tom and Kate, how many words can you fit on a side of A4? Is it 500, something like that? That any more than that, and it's going to be a lot for a potential supervisor to process. And the same for the application, but nobody's expecting to see a 20-page research proposal, absolutely not. And it's partly because you don't yet know what the research is going to be like. you are proposing research, but sometimes I see research proposals that look like they say in chapter 4 I will argue that. Well, you don't know because you've not done the research yet. So I would say a couple of pages, three at the most probably, and then you'll have a bibliography. You should always include a full bibliography with the research proposal. If you're not sure, you can contact a supervisor and say, this is the area I'm working in. Might you be interested in seeing a research proposal of 2 or 3 pages? And if they say, oh yeah, give me more, then fine, up to them. But it seems to me a couple of pages is going to be about the right length. And if they want more, they'll ask for it. So that would be my suggestion. Silke is asking whether the stipend is the same for all students, or can a disability or diagnosis affect the calculation? I believe, and again, some of my colleagues who are working in the background might be able to confirm this, that the stipend is the same, but there is, and in fact, somebody has jumped right in there is access to disability support allowance. So there are university funds to support people with kind of any adjustments or specifics they might need if they are if they're disabled or have a chronic illness that might be affecting their studies. So okay, what other things can we think about? Here's something that I always like to ask people, which is just about Glasgow, the city. So I'm not from Glasgow. I moved here for the job 16 years ago. I acquired a husband, 2 children, and a fantastic set of colleagues, and I've never regretted it. But Tom, if you'll forgive me, I discern that you're probably not from Glasgow. Katie, I'm harder to work out. But Tom, would you say a little bit about Glasgow, the university, and Glasgow, the city?
Sure. For me, it's been quite funny insofar as an English-speaking person. I'm in an English-speaking country, but it is meaningfully different for the other English-speaking country I'm from, which is the United States, if that were not immediately obvious from my accent. And that it's certainly been an adjustment period for me, my spouse, my kids. We're far away from family and from our support networks. And so I think there's been a real part of our experience, to be quite honest, has been some social isolation, just not having to rebuild networks of, friends and potential caregivers for children, and coming off the back of 10 years involved in church communities, which was where my work and previous studies were. There is definitely a solitary quality to the humanities researcher life, as Katie gestured to earlier. That said, we love Glasgow. We've come to love it. I see it through the eyes of a couple of toddlers. So I'm really familiar with all the places that are really good for kids. I couldn't tell you what pubs to go to or where the great dancing venues are, because that is not the shape of my life right now, and that's okay. It was at one time, but we're great fans of being here. We're happy to be here. If there were an opportunity to be here longer, we would seriously consider it. So the choice was hard to make the transition, but we're glad we did it.
Well, that's an endorsement. If there's, if I could stay, I would. I'm not just counting down the hours to get out. Katie, what about you?
So I'm from 45 minutes away from Glasgow, so I can't be super objective, but I can be more objective about my experience of the research culture at Glasgow Uni. And I really, as I mentioned before, felt quite shocked by how isolated arts and humanities research was when I first started. But the opportunities that there is to organised by the graduate school have been amazing. I'm lucky enough that my family is not so far, but I am someone who thrives on social interaction and needs it in my day-to-day life. And particularly in my first year, which was really heavily focused on literature review, I did all the training that I could do through the university and met lots of people and took part in competitions in the university just to get the opportunity to meet people. And I think that it was a really positive experience through that. certainly in kind of interacting with people. I love the city, but I can't really say that being from so close.
Well, I can, because I came here from the southeast England, and I came here because I needed a job. I applied for the jobs. This is the job I got. But my God, I'm so lucky to have ended up in such a fantastic city and a fantastic country. I mean, it really is the ideal size for me for a city. It's big enough that there's lots going on, and my kids have access to so many interesting events and activities. But it's small enough that you can feel it doesn't feel overwhelming. The arts and culture in Glasgow is phenomenal, even under the current straitened circumstances of arts and culture in many parts of the UK. But it is phenomenal, and it is a cliche, but it's absolutely true that Glaswegian people are so friendly. They're funny. They're warm. There's that kind of engagement that you get in the city. And when I go down south and start just chatting to somebody on the bus, people look at me a bit peculiarly, and I realise I've become a naturalised Glaswegian. It's really great to hear Katie talking a little bit about the kind of things that she's taken, the opportunity she's taken up internally to do things like the training events that we run. The university really recognises the difficulties and challenges of individual postgraduate research students, where it can be quite isolating. So there's quite a lot of there are research and development, which is the university level provision to support researchers do a lot of wellbeing events. There's running, there's gardening, as well as how to write a literature review and the more technical stuff. We just led, I wasn't able to go unfortunately, but we just took students on a day trip to the beautiful Mount Stewart on the Isle of Bute as another event for just an opportunity for our students to get together, to experience a bit more of the beautiful west of Scotland, and get to know each other. So we do try to make those opportunities available to people. So it's very interesting to hear people who've come from very different parts of the world to experience Glasgow. I'm going to just reinforce a couple of things slightly randomly that have come through I've seen in the comments, just to make sure people have heard of them. My colleague has mentioned that we do have a great international student support service, and they are the go-to people for international students who have technical questions about visas and all of that really complicated immigration stuff, and also just more broadly in terms of kind of networks of support and so on. Really important. Something else I do want to mention that was mentioned by a colleague up in the chat, but is super important, which is if you want to apply to Glasgow for a scholarship through us, please use the college's forms. And the reason for that is that you'll find that the SAGSA website has guidance. Follow the guidance, absolutely. Do all the reading you can on the SAGSA website. When you're filling in the form, use the University of Glasgow College and SAGSA application form. And the reason for that, there we are. So that's the link there. The reason for that is that makes sure we've got all the information we need to make sure we cover all of the widening participation elements that we need to cover at both SAGSA and college level, and to make sure that you're also eligible for that college scholarship. So please make sure that you do use that form. Your supervisor should be guiding you on that anyway. But just a sort of technical point there to make sure that you're kept right. Okay, we've got a little bit further time in case there's anybody who wants to jump in. And most of the questions there have been quite specific, and colleagues have been able to answer them. We might be moving towards the end of the session, but if you've got any questions, do drop them in. I wonder what in the meantime, whether it's a difficult question maybe, but whether Tom or Katie might be able to say anything about the highlights of their PhD experience so far. So that's quite a tricky one to throw at people. So I'm going to see if either of you can pick out a highlight to give people a bit of a flavour. Katie.
Actually, I think going back to where we were earlier in the conversation, some of the SAGSA events have been the highlights for me. I've just finished second year now, so we had the year 2 symposium that SAGSA runs for lots of year 2s that are funded, and we shared lots of information. I was part of the organising committee, which is something I'd never done anything like that before. Really good experience doing that, but also just sitting in and listening to those completely, different subject matters, but we managed to make panels from them and things they shared, and actually things spoke to the same topics, and all of that gave me a whole new perspective on my research. I'm currently thinking about doing an internship, and it made me rethink where I might want to do an internship, and that was probably one of my highlights. And all the SAGSA events where we've been together as a cohort have probably been my highlights so far.
Oh, brilliant. And so a possible internship on the cards for you. That's great. Exciting. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, well, at the quite personal level, my research is like deeply connected to some of my most important, personal and in my case, spiritual values, and to dive deep into something that's like really important to me and that I know is really important to a number of other people. I read both of my kids The Lord of the Rings the first time. The first words they ever heard when they came out of the womb were the opening lines of The Lord of the Rings for both of them. And to have the opportunity to connect to something that's personally meaningful to me, to scholarship, to a wider world of readers and thinkers has been at times quite moving, actually, and to open up, to find other people who are doing that same work as you, broadening beyond just the university here and finding a community of scholars, I found to be very nourishing and supportive. And I would also say that SAGSA, I just finished year one, and SAGSA taking us for a 3-day retreat on the Isle of Great Cumbria off the west coast of Scotland was definitely a highlight. Getting to wander around the Isle of Arran and ride the last functional paddle boat steamer in the UK, I believe. Yeah, SAGSA throws in some perks. And of course, getting to know so many wonderful and brilliant people in my SAGSA cohort, at the Center for Fantasy and the Fantastic, in the wider college. It's those relationships that drive me as a scholar and as a person, and that I find the most joy in.
Thanks. That's such a powerful articulation of what has to underpin all of it. If you're going to do this PhD, yes, it's rewarding, but it's tough. It's hard. It's it's a lot of work, and it's a long journey with ups and downs, to use the hideous metaphor. But to get the reward of spending that time deeply immersed in something you care about, and admittedly there'll be times when you want to throw the whole thing out the window, also normal, but something you deeply care about, that's the beginning and end to me of why anyone would do a PhD. So that's really interesting to hear you say that. And yeah, I mean, again, the west of Scotland, what a beautiful place. I mean, just what a beautiful place, and to have it so close and on the doorstep is it is a bit of a privilege. So but your children have, I mean, what's going to happen if they end up not being Tolkien fans? That's quite a...
I'm sure we'll find other things to connect about.
There you go. That's exactly it. Okay, so we will be ending in 5 minutes, and if anybody has got any final questions that they want to ask, I'm just going to have a look as well at my crib sheet to check if there's anything that we should be sharing with you that we haven't yet done. And I think we've talked through quite a lot of the key areas about the application process, finding a supervisor, the PDR community in arts, what it's like to live and research in Glasgow, and obviously we've been focusing on the funding side of it. So I don't know if then, as we round up, I'm not seeing any more questions coming through, whether there are any parting shots from Tom and Katie before we conclude. Katie, is there anything that you want to add that we haven't yet covered?
I'm trying to think of anything that we've not covered.
We've done our job so well. What can I think? I think your advice on
I just kind of, I guess, to reiterate, the community side of things, and how important that's been to me, and how it's come up in unexpected places and things that I had thought would be good professional development opportunities, not necessarily good networking opportunities, but I've ended up making close friends from really, really different disciplines who have had large bearings on the way that I've gone about my work, even though really their subject matters are completely different from mine. And that's been a really, really kind of important and valuable part of doing a PhD. And anyone who comes, I think, to grab those opportunities, particularly in first year, maybe when you have a little bit of space to do that, because I feel like those spaces are, as the research builds up into a snowball, gets less and less. So taking those opportunities when you can and making those connections makes things easier in the long run.
Yeah. That's great. That sort of openness to what might be useful or valuable in different ways, in kind of academic ways, in personal ways, interpersonal ways, network ways. Yeah, that's really interesting. Tom, any final thoughts?
I'll echo what Katie said, and just the importance and value of the relationships you develop. This is about the arts and humanities, which are many things, but human connection is certainly one of them. And so remembering to keep the humanity and the humane at the center of your experience, because it's super easy to get lost in your own head and in the texts and in the arguments you're going to have with other scholars, with yourself, with hopefully not your supervisors, although tensions can happen, so it depends on the relationship. But I think, it's hard to look after yourself when there are so many countervailing forces, and it's so easy to just be working 24/7, but making sure that you have relationships and have found ways to care for yourself at the center of all this research, I would strongly recommend if you want to stay sane and get through the 3.5 years. It's brilliant, it's tough, and it requires some intentionality.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. That's such an important point, and I think it's absolutely the case that it is possible for research to be all-consuming and for it to feel like a 24/7 occupation. And we strongly, in the graduate school, emphasise that this is not everything you're doing. You have lives. Our students have families. They have interests. They have things they want to do. That you do the work while you're doing the work, and you stop and you rest and you recuperate and you recharge and you look after your well-being. And we are really insistent on that message from the graduate school, and indeed from the university more widely. And that's the context in which people thrive. That's the context in which good research happens, and people thrive as individuals and become the vanguard arts humanities researchers and humanitarians of the future. So thank you for putting it in that way. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. People will no doubt have questions, and my colleagues will put in the chat an email address that you can use. We ask you to please make sure that you have looked at our graduate school website and looked at the SAGSA website. If you still have questions and you're unsure, then do email us and we will assist you as best we can. We really look forward to seeing your exciting PhD applications. We encourage you to get those conversations with supervisors early and take their advice about scholarship applications. It is grueling and the odds are challenging, but people get them. Here are 2 of them. So we really encourage you to get those conversations going early. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you with us from across the globe. I'm going to sign off now and say thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks so much to Tom and Katie for all your time. I really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.